welcome to On Trial, starring Mark Radulich, also starring Sean Comer. Hope you're ready, Hollywood, because you're on trial.
All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Harry T. Stone presiding. This is On Trial, brought to you by the Radulich Broadcasting Network. And tonight I am your defense attorney for this particular proceeding, Mr. Mark Radulich, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified. And tonight, our three-part series that started with Ed Brubaker and ended with Nicholas Winding Refn, ends with Only God Forgives on the docket. Only God Forgives was a 2013 action film written and directed by said Nicholas Winding Refn, which stars Ryan Gosling, Kristen Scott Thomas, and other names I can't pronounce. It was shot on location in Bangkok, Thailand, and as with Drive, it was dedicated to Chilean director Alejandro Jodorowsky. It competed for the Palme d'Or at the 2013 Cannes Film Festival, and it won, believe it or not, the grand prize at the Sydney Film Festival. But here to prosecute said art piece, said French New Wave-inspired cinema, ladies and gentlemen, Sean Comer, how do you do, sir?
You are blowing me away with the reality of just how successful this movie was. Seriously.
We don't do a lot of high art on this network at all.
You're being generous.
But I'll tell you, having spent a week or so, looking into Too Old to Die Young, and then by extension, the great works of Nicholas Winding Refn, and looking at reviews and just doing some digging, there is definitely, in the film critic community alone, there is definitely a thirst for anything out of the ordinary, anything weird, anything that doesn't resemble
that doesn't
90% of what's out there.
Good, but that doesn't mean that it's good.
No, and I think, but isn't that the conversation piece? Because I think people sometimes will equate not like the others to good, and I think they lose sight of what criticism should be. So they go, hey, this thing is shot differently, acted differently, written differently, composited differently than everything else I've seen, and all I've seen are Transformers and Marvel movies. So this is automatically, like, amazing. And it's like, well, take a step back and judge the film on its own merits, not compared to, not compared to a Transformers film or the Avengers, and does it still hold up? And I think that's a conversation that often gets lost. It's either it's great because it's not the Transformers, or it's bad. I don't understand it. There's not a lot of conversation of, well, what is this thing? Is it good film, and what is good film?
And look, please, I implore all of you, do not mistake this for me begrudging you if you liked this. You're entitled to like whatever you want. Me not liking it should not damage your enjoyment. And
so
if it does, then it's your place to question just how into this you really were in the first place, and why.
So Refn gets often compared to David Lynch, sometimes negatively, sometimes positively. Like, there are some that would say Refn, is trying to imitate David Lynch and doing a bad job of it that would make David Lynch laugh. And then there are others that, like, he's the modern David Lynch. The other thing that his recent works are compared to, especially Too Old to Die Young, was Twin Peaks. Are you familiar with either?
I haven't watched Too Old to Die It's a Die Young.
Are you familiar with David Lynch or Twin Peaks?
Well, yes. Well, I'm familiar with Twin Peaks, and that's really about my only familiarity with David Lynch. And I rather enjoy Twin Peaks. It's quirky, it's nonsensical, it's dreamy, and yet it still manages to make its own kind of sense. Mm-hmm. It still manages to engage me. It still captivates me. And I mean, let's just put that out there. I can actually make heads or tails of the naming convention of Twin Peaks. It takes place in a town called Twin fucking Peaks. Whereas, on the other hand, between Only God Forgives and Too Old... Is it Too Old to Die Young? Is that the name of the other one?
Yeah, Too Old to Die Young.
And Too Old to Die Young, I'm left thinking that these names sound like the movies that Jerry, George, and Elaine would debate going to if they can't make the 9-10 for prognosis negative. They're titles that somebody concocted specifically because they desperately want this movie to sound interesting. Mm-hmm. Whether the name makes any goddamn sense or not. What was the Family Guy joke during the two-parter where Brian buggers off to Hollywood to go become a screenwriter? He's absolutely gobsmacked that somebody sold a movie called Death Spares Not the Tiger. that feels like that's going to be the capstone on the quadrilogy.
So I am, as I'm looking at his filmography, I'm actually moderately familiar with David Lynch because I saw Dune when I was a kid, and I was a kid, so I didn't understand it. But years later, I did see Blue Velvet, and boy, is that a trip. I saw Lost Highway, and even
spectacular soundtrack.
Yeah, Lost Highway is a great soundtrack, but that was definitely one of them where I looked at my friend, and I'm pretty sure, even back in 1997, I'm like, if someone doesn't throw a pie soon in this thing, I'm walking out.
Even back then, you were still just watching Uncle Vanya, and you just couldn't sit still.
You know, we were having this conversation last night during the 3-hour epic Too Young to Die Young podcast, and I said there was a stretch of my life, I would say throughout grad school, when I came back from Los Angeles, where I was really in probably summer college, where I was really into collecting DVDs, and the more DVDs I got, the weirder my collection got, and I really got into like foreign films. French would be foreign, but French films specifically. We talked about Irreversible last night with Monica Bellucci. That was one of them, and like I was into weird, and I was into cinema, and I was definitely like a snooty film student type, even though I wasn't a film student. But even Lost Highway was like, oof, get to the fucking point. But it's and that's been the long, strange, fun trip of this week's worth of shows, which was, you know, I thought we were doing gritty crime noir with Ed Brubaker, and then I landed here, and and Refn does like crime stories, but he does them in this really weird neon palette, and he turns them into like modern fairy tales, and it's you use the word dreamy. That's been associated with his stuff.
I would. You call it neon drenched. I just generally use the term visually hostile. It is an absolute.
It does have strip club motif, doesn't it?
It is an absolute, just full frontal assault on the eyes.
Yeah.
Apparently, there is only light bulbs only come in one color in Bangkok, and it's fucking red.
Yeah, that was every nighttime shot in Too Old to Die Young was like that too.
Everything is either drenched in red, like the blood rave scene in Blade, or it's shot in inky shadow under a streetlight. Those are the two predominant tones of this movie.
Now, you say you haven't seen Drive, correct?
I have not seen Drive. I always kind of meant to because I'm a huge Christina Hendricks fan. But I never got around to it, and now after this one, I don't think I ever will.
Yeah, I mean, Drive was nominated at least for all kinds of awards and won a few of them. I think it won like an Oscar for sound. I was having that debate with Winfrey the other night, and people regard Drive as kind of like the high point of Refn's career, and then
yikes.
And then they look at this, which came out in 2013, and then Too Old to Die Young, which came out in 2019, and they're like, can't quite get back to Drive. But the other conversation piece that comes out of discussing Refn is how much of his stuff plays in the same ballpark. And I think he does that. You know, I was reading some of the notes on this movie, which I'll shoot over to you in just a second. But I want to say that that's purposeful. Like, he is using the same color paleting, the same dialogue pacing, the same directorial structure and style for this slew of movies that he's done since Drive for a particular reason. There's a comment that he's making in our private chat when you were sort of live tweeting your thoughts about this.
I'm faking it until I make it. Is that his statement?
Is the word pretentious?
Yes.
And I think that's fair. I don't know if that's bad. I'm undecided because I think there's a part of me that wants to like these things, that wants to appreciate them, and that's why I understand like the film critic point of view of, Christ, if I have to watch Flora and Ulysses or Willy's Wonderland or any of the schlock that's been coming out lately, please give me something. And so it's like, okay, I think I think I have enough patience for that to sort of get through it. So it'll be a fun defense tonight. But yeah, as you were like I said, this struck you as very pretentious and I think most people would define pretentiousness as a bad thing. I'm not sure it always is, and I think that's a point of discussion. But that's something we can get into in our individual prosecution and defense of the movie. So with that said, why don't you give me some notes if you've got any?
No, I don't have anything. I decided to just come into this fresh because you're so much more familiar with Nicholas Winding Refn than I am, and I came in with some optimism, to be perfectly honest, because I always heard good things about Drive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but I don't know. I mean, you're so much more versed than he is. So why don't we flip the script in this time?
Okay. And
why don't I sit under the learning tree and you tell me all about what went into this?
There's not really a lot to say. The production notes go as follows. Refn has said from the beginning he had the idea of a thriller produced as a Western, all in the Far East and with a modern cowboy hero. He originally planned to direct Only God Forgives directly after Valhalla Rising, which Robert Winfrey highly recommends, by the way. But he accepted Gosling's request to direct Drive instead. Gosling has described the script of Only God Forgives as the strangest thing I've ever read, and it's only going to get stranger. Like Drive, the film was largely shot chronologically, and scenes were often edited the day they were shot. Footage was screened at the 2012 Cannes Film Festival. Refn drew a connection between Only God Forgives and Drive, saying, Only God Forgives is very much a continuation of that language. It's based on real emotions, but set in a heightened reality. It's a fairy tale. So imagine you're high, okay? And you're talking about the nature of man and life and what is air and God. And someone says, okay, but what if we put neon lights on and I punched a prostitute? That's Refn. Or at least specifically this movie. I want to also break out of our typical structure here by reading you 3 cast descriptions. Because I think it's important to get some assembly, especially with one in particular that I sent you. I think it's important to know that going into this story. So Ryan Gosling plays Julian Thompson. He's an American living in Bangkok and is a respected figure in the criminal underworld, according to a production synopsis. Gosling was in negotiations to star in the film in June 2011 after Luke Evans dropped out because of The Hobbit. Gosling had undertaken Muay Thai training in... What the fuck is Muay Thai? Muay Thai training in preparation for the role by that September, which included 2 to 3 hour daily sessions. Refn also participated in the training. Gosling and Refn had recently worked together on the neo-noir action drama Drive. Julian only speaks 17 lines throughout the film. The idea for Julian to stick his hand into his dead mother's womb came from Gosling himself. And it only gets better from here.
Why? Wait. Why?
It doesn't say. There's a link to an article here, but let's move forward for just a moment. Kristen Scott Thomas as Crystal Thompson, Julian's mother, who is described as a merciless and terrifying mafia godmother, combining elements of, get this, Lady Macbeth and Donatella Versace. It's a Versace.
I hate to say it, but I can actually kind of see it.
And then finally, I'm going to try to get through this. Vithaya Ringarm as Lieutenant Chang / the Angel of Vengeance.
Out of respect, he is just Lieutenant Chang from now on, both in the interest of not butchering the actor's birth name, and for the fact that he was hands down the best part of this movie.
So Lieutenant Chang, a.k.a. the Angel of Vengeance, a man that believes himself to be God, in the sense that God in the Old Testament is saying, I can be cruel, you have to fear me, as I can be kind, you have to love me. Lieutenant Chang did his own Thai boxing and singing for his role, because why not break into karaoke periodically? Refn stated in an interview, the character of One Eye went into Drive, then went into the Thai police lieutenant. They're the same character, played by 3 different actors, a mythological creature that has a mysterious past but cannot relate to the reality because he's heightened and he's pure fetish.
I have a question.
Where's the aspirin?
No. Well, fuck it. I have myriad questions, but let's just start with this one.
Yes, sir.
The lore you just ran down for me.
Yeah.
Did I miss something, or was any of this laid out in any of these movies explicitly?
Not that I can tell.
So we are in some I just decided Dumbledore is gay territory.
So I clicked that article. You seem like you wanted me to. So we're on Hollywood.com, and it says, the mysterious bromance of Ryan Gosling and his Only God Forgives director Nicholas Winding Refn. When asked about the polarizing nature of Only God Forgives, a film whose grotesque violence, aggressive style, and underplayed characters have split audiences pretty rigidly into groups of love and hate, Ryan Gosling called his new movie kind of like a drug, explaining that you either have a good trip or a bad trip. Wow, no truer words have ever been spoken about any movie I've ever seen.
Okay, if I may quote what Nash and Tara of Radio Dead Air have long said about meth, this is not a fun drug.
That reminds me, one day we really have to do Spun.
I'm now kind of afraid to ask, what is Spun?
It's a movie where everyone's on meth.
Oh God, yes, we have to do Spun.
Did you have anything more about Nash and what's her?
No, it's just that's my response to saying it's like a drug. This is not a fun drug.
Okay, so
why would I want to take this drug?
So Spun, which is super fun, by the way, is a 2003 American black comedy crime drama directed by Jonas Åkerlund, from an original screenplay by William De Los Santos and Creighton Vero, based on 3 days of De Los Santos' life in the Eugene, Oregon drug subculture. Stars Jason Schwartzman, John Leguizamo, Mina Suvari, Patrick Fugit, Peter Stormare, Alexis Arquette, Deborah Harry, Rob Halford, Eric Roberts, Chloe Hunter, Nicholas Gonzalez, Brittany Murphy, and Mickey Rourke.
That's Spun.
That's Spun.
God damn it, we're watching Spun.
Yeah, we'll have to find a place on the count. Just
Yes.
hey, Black Widow's coming out. To synergize with that, Spun.
Folks, I got news for you. This is not going to be a week where anybody's going to be prosecuting this.
All right, so that's Spun, and we'll get to it eventually. Back to this article. Speaking about the film at a press conference on Tuesday, alongside director Nicholas Winding Refn and co-stars Kristen Scott Thomas and Lieutenant Chang, Gosling was happy to joke about the trippy essence and disturbing themes of his latest feature, and eager to poke fun at filmmaker Refn, with whom he worked on the universally well-received 2011 film Drive. "You're not really sure of the film you're making," Gosling said. It's funny, Tom Holland said the same thing about the new Spider-Man, and I called him a moron for it. Gosling said, remarking on the organic unraveling of the story during the director's stringent process of chronological filming, and neither is Refn. Born from its organic practice was the eventual fate of Thomas's Crystal. The actress only first learned of the ultimate fate of her vindictive character after arriving in Bangkok for shooting. The chronological order makes everything much suppler, much softer, much more open, and much more malleable. You can change everything so much. I got to Bangkok and somebody told me I was going to die. Oh, okay, after a laugh, Thomas continued. It doesn't mean she doesn't have to have a satisfactory exit, and then other things happened to her afterwards, which also I was totally unprepared for. Of course, Thomas was referring to Gosling's character sticking his hands into her corpse, her corpse's dead womb. A machination that came from Gosling himself. Wasn't Gosling in The Notebook?
Yes. Yes, he was. Congratulations, rom-com fans. That's now ruined for you forever.
I wish I was a hacker, and that every digital copy available of The Notebook, just in one of the love scenes, and I've never seen The Notebook, but just one of the like a high romance parts where women get all kinds of wet and sticky, just immediately cuts to him shoving his hand into Kristen Scott Stewart and cuts back again.
Kristen Scott Thomas.
Thomas, yeah, sorry. Or Kristen Stewart. I don't care at this point. Shove your hand into a dead woman's womb is what I'm trying to tell you.
This podcast is brought to you by...
Yeah, we'll get there in a second. Anyway.
Was brought to you by... That's forever.
This is the first time we talked about a Gosling joke, recounting how he came up with the idea. Nicholas said, "I think she should die. What do you want to do when you see your dead mother? Do you want to cry? Do you want to laugh?" As kind of a joke, I said, "Maybe I'll cut her open and put my hands in her womb." And he was like, "Cool." I want to work with this guy. Reflecting on... I don't
know if I want to be in the same area code as this guy.
This is the Tony Khan of filmmaking. I'm just now realizing, hey, we want to do this stupid thing on AEW Dynamite. Okay, do it. Reflecting on how the notion came to him, Gosling said, "I can't speak for what I was thinking then. It just felt like the right thing to do at the time." And this goes on.
Yeah, congratulations, everybody. The Notebook is now ruined for you forever.
It's going in the podcast description tonight. To join us as we ruin the Notebook forever. Here's Only God Forgives.
Yes, it has to. This is the way.
All right, let's move on. So here's the plot synopsis, which I forgot to do the last time we did it on trial. It's okay. Moving on. So this is just instead of me sort of just kind of orating the whole thing, I'm just going to kind of read from the wiki here, so everyone gets the details, and then we can get into you can get into your prosecution. So before I do that, though, this plot synopsis was brought to you by Grammarly. Sean, now you do a lot of writing on the internet, and yes, and so I don't know if you know about Grammarly or not, but you can use Grammarly to help you with your work. Do you want to know what Grammarly is? Grammarly is an AI-powered product that helps people communicate more effectively. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and nearly anywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. Doesn't that sound great? Something very useful for what you do for your job?
You know what? I've actually been a user for years, and I would also throw in that anymore Grammarly is compatible with the text inputs for Office, Chrome, Facebook Messenger, Twitter, Facebook, virtually anywhere you have to input lines of text. Grammarly will be looking over your shoulder for possibly embarrassing errors and anything that might just help neaten up whatever you have to be writing at the time.
So for you listeners of On Trial and any of our podcasts on the Radulich Broadcasting Network brought to you by the W2M Network, Grammarly is actually offering a free download of the Grammarly software. So why don't you go on over to getgrammarly.com/W2M Network. That's G-E-T Grammarly, GRAMMARLY.com/W2M Network. And you can download Grammarly for free and give it a try. I think that's wonderful. All right. Now with the bills paid, Julian is an American expatriate who, along with his older brother Billy, runs a Muay Thai boxing club in Bangkok, Thailand, as a front for drug dealing. Julian is quiet. That's an understatement. And seems to have a troubled past. He engages in deviant sexual practices, preferring to be bound as he watches his favorite prostitute, Mai, masturbate, like you do. One night, Billy rapes and kills an underage prostitute and is cornered by Thai police. Lieutenant Chang allows the girl's father, Choi-An Lee, to exact his vengeance on Billy however he sees fit. Choi chooses to beat Billy to death in the same room Billy killed the girl, but Chang later cuts off Choi's forearm for allowing his daughter to be a prostitute in the first place. During a session with Mai, Julian has a vision of himself meeting Chang in a dark room where Chang cuts off his hands. Upon discovering his brother has been murdered, Julian and his crew go to Choi's kiosk to confront him, but Julian ultimately decides to spare Choi's life. When Julian's mother, Crystal, arrives in Bangkok, she demands that he find and kill the men responsible for Billy's death. Julian refuses, believing Choi was justified in avenging the death of his daughter, infuriating Crystal. Having Choi killed, Crystal learns of Chang's involvement and meets with Byron, a rival drug dealer. She offers to cut him into her drug dealing operation if he will put out a hit on Chang. The police arrive at Julian's club investigating Choi's murder, but Chang concludes that Julian is not the killer. Julian recognizes Chang from his visions and follows him from the boxing club, but Chang seems to disappear into thin air before Julian can catch up to him. That evening, Julian brings Mai to meet Crystal, posing as his girlfriend. Crystal sees through the ruse, insulting Mai and demeaning Julian, pronouncing him to be sexually inferior to his dead brother. Julian is passive to Crystal's verbal abuse, but his aggravation results in him viciously humiliating Mai afterwards by making her remove her dress on the way home from the restaurant. And in the only dialogue given in the show where he gets above a whisper, he yelled at her in an alley. I was almost knocked off my bed that I was watching it on. 2 gunmen on motorbikes are sent to kill Chang in a restaurant, which results in several customers and a couple of Chang's men being killed in the ensuing shootout. Chang kills one of the assassins and pursues and apprehends the other. The surviving gunman leads Chang to his boss, Li Po, who has resorted to arranging assassination contracts as a means of providing for his disabled son. Chang then kills the gunman but spares Li Po after seeing his affection for his son. Chang finds Byron in a club and tortures him to reveal who ordered the hit. Julian confronts Chang and challenges him to a fight at Julian's boxing venue that Sean said resembled Anderson Silva versus Forrest Griffin. And he's not wrong. With Ryan Gosling being the unfortunate Forrest Griffin in this case. Chang, an experienced boxer, quickly beats Julian, who does not land a single blow.
And he was very confused.
Yes. And then he hit me. Afterwards, Crystal tells Julian that Chang has figured out she ordered the hits. Fearful for her life, she pleads with Julian to kill Chang the same way she asked Julian to kill his own father for her. She promises that after Julian kills Chang, they will go back home and she will be a true mother to him. With his associate Charlie Ling, Julian infiltrates Chang's home after shooting Chang's guard dead, intent on ambushing Chang when he returns. Charlie informs Julian that Crystal instructed him to execute Chang's entire family. Charlie murders the nanny of Chang's daughter as she enters the room, but Julian kills Charlie before he can murder Chang's daughter. Chang and the police officer find Crystal in the hotel where she is staying. She explains how Julian killed his father with his bare hands, asserting to Chang that Julian is violent and deranged, blaming him for the violent crimes committed in the family's name. Chang decides to punish her by cutting her throat. Later, Julian returns to the hotel and finds his mother's corpse. In silence, he approaches her body and cuts open her abdomen before placing his hand inside of the wound. Julian is last seen standing in a field with Chang, who appears to cut off both of Julian's hands with his sword. Chang is last seen performing a passionate song in a karaoke club filled with fellow police officers as the credits roll. Your witness, sir.
This movie is an answer to a question that absolutely no one has ever asked. What would happen if Wes Anderson got really bored of being boring and decided to make an action movie? From the very beginning, we are given absolutely no reason to care about any of these people, with the possible exception of Lieutenant Chang. In fact, quite frankly, if the ex post facto lore that Mark rattled off had actually been somehow woven into not only this narrative, but given it a connection to its preceding movie, Drive, this movie might have actually been salvageable as something interesting. But as it stands, it's plotting banality masquerading pretentiously as inscrutable, fascinating depth. And it does it badly. And look, in all fairness to anybody who would like this, 19 or 20-year-old Sean would have probably positively masturbated over this movie. Because, of course, this was back when I thought that movies like Fight Club and Donnie Darko were just chock-a-block with people saying important things about stuff, man. Stuff. When what I really didn't understand, particularly in the case of Donnie Darko and another moderately more interesting movie called Waking Life, was that it's smoke and mirrors, fam. It's smoke and mirrors. I'll back up just a little bit. What I don't know if anybody has ever explained to Nicholas Winding Refn is the idea that most auteurs choose their shots with a sense of purpose, with a sense of what they're trying to convey with the tempo, the depth of field, the length of the shot, what is achieved by a fast cut versus a long pan on a dolly. Winding Refn seems to choose excruciatingly long cuts or long takes and shots for no other reason except for fuck it. They don't really establish anything important. They don't contribute greatly to mood. It's just the camera holding on one long shot on a scene for what feels like forever. Everything is just one long neon bukkake shot. There's nothing to convey shifts in what should be theoretically shifts in mood. Not that anybody's mood ever really changes in this movie in the first place. But it really deprives this movie of the one thing that it could have possibly had going for it, and that is at least being fun to look at. because God knows there's not really much else going on. We're thrown in, nothing is really established about any character, except we find out that one brother is a pedophile, and another's face would probably not shift a single iota if I were to get a 10-pace running start and kick him bullseye in the daddy bag. We at least learn something interesting about Chang as we go, and that he's a man with, or rather just an entity, apparently, with a definitive moral compass. But equally confusing is this notion that somehow he's supposed to be the antagonist in this. And I just have to ask, why? Why? What about him ever comes across as unreasonable, except for possibly his near execution of the grieving father that he allows to that he allows to reap his vengeance upon the man who savagely murdered his daughter. That's really the closest we ever get to a dick move from this force of nature. Otherwise, I mean, if anything, he's an anti-hero. He's exacting vengeance on terrible people, even if we might not always necessarily agree with his methods. And on another note, he's also just about the only one who ever really feels like Nicholas Winding Refn had any interest in taking something that's as fascinating and vivid and at times heartbreakingly gritty as the culture of the rougher parts of Bangkok, and really bringing it to life. Because Thai police really do have a rather brutal approach to dealing with drug dealers and traffickers, and that is make them go away by just about any means necessary. You know, he's the only character where we get an immediate sense of his motivations and at least something instinctual about how we're supposed to feel. And Lieutenant Chang, and again, I don't want to try to pronounce the actor's name because I don't want to shame myself and really disrespect him by mispronouncing it. So I hope you'll forgive me that much. He really is just an intriguing, captivating force of nature, because we see this man who speaks softly but carries a fuck off sword come home to his daughter and their nanny, and we find that he's benevolent, kind, caring, ultimately respectful, even to the people who become his prey. And meanwhile, what do we learn about everybody else? Again, there's really nothing to Julian that resembles character development except for that borderline girlish Ned Flanders-like shriek when he orders Mai to take off her dress. And it makes sense for Mai to be portrayed with something of a vacant 1,000-yard stare at times, because she's a sex worker. You could understand portraying her as being very compartmentalized, you know, extremely internally composed, even in the most uncomfortable scenarios, just by virtue of what she more than likely sees and experiences every day. That makes sense. In Julian's case, there's no subtlety to Goslin's quiet acting. there's nothing in his physicality that conveys anything going on beneath the surface except boredom. It's almost like there's no concept that, you keep the quiet parts quiet sometimes in what you say, because they're meant to mean more in contrast to how loud you say the loud parts. But there is no loud to contrast it against. He doesn't come across as withdrawn. He just comes across as dull, and that's it. That's it, and monotonous. The best comparison I can liken it to is how, when I was in my early 20s, after hearing about it constantly, I finally saw Taxi Driver for the first time. I had read about its subtext and its cinematic vocabulary and some of the subtle and not so subtle commentary it was making on its time. And while I enjoyed Taxi Driver, I never really fully appreciated it at the time. Now, after watching this, I appreciate it so much more. Because I can now kind of see, by contrast, how much it was able to convey about Travis Bickle without resorting to contrived exposition dumps or Deus Ex Machina. How much it conveyed with the simple juxtaposition of how he interacted with different characters in different scenarios, and how that shifted over the course of the movie. When it comes to Julian, there is no shift. No matter what happens to it, there is no shift. There is no change. There is nothing subtle about his interactions that demonstrates that he's feeling anything. And again, we don't get any kind of lore dump on him until the last 20 minutes of the movie. And even then, it's coming from Cocaine Karen, the ultimate in unreliable narrators. We don't know if any of what she's saying is actually true. For all we know, she's just trying to bullshit her way out of being summarily executed. And speaking of which, she's not Crystal. She's Cocaine Karen from now on, because the very first time we see her in the movie, she's literally demanding to speak to the manager of a hotel, because, as she's politely informed, her room is not going to be quite ready yet, as per policy. The rest of the movie, when we do come across her, it's one profane, profanity and epithet-laden interaction after another. And quite frankly, it comes across like a 12-year-old in Call of Duty voice chat trying to come across as one of the cool older kids. It's one more convention that's masquerading as somehow being interesting or energetic, or giving us a reason why she stands out. No, it doesn't. Because again, there's no investment in her character whatsoever. All she is just a foul-mouthed white lady. That's all. That's all we're really given. And for God's sake, guys, swearing does not make you interesting. It doesn't. I mean, dirty words are not a personality. And come on. If you've ever listened to any of our shows, if you ever caught my stream on Twitch, you know that I am not averse to profanity. Not by any stretch whatsoever. I once fancied myself a virtuoso of the word fuck. But even I have to admit, it didn't really do anything to necessarily make me funnier or make what I said any more meaningful. Just every time the character opens her mouth, about 10 seconds later, I just go, "Are you fucking done yet? Are you done? Please say you're done. Please say your lines are over, preferably forever." And that's all this movie is. It is 90 minutes of a string of absolutely nothing whatsoever to invest in. I mean, even the action scenes are nothing to, such as they are nothing to really write home about. The chase after the attempted hit on Lieutenant Chang. If you were to look to say, the opening, the first chase scene in Casino Royale through the slums, if you were to look at that as being an absolute dead sprint, this chase feels like a power walk. The fight scene between Julian and Lieutenant Chang, again, that's why I sent that clip to Mark, is because you see Lieutenant Chang just calmly slip one punch after another, and it's really like, oh, did you really think you were going to hit me? What a stupid thing to think, you slow white boy. And he just proceeds to get his ass handed to him, which, if anything, I'm definitely impressed that it led to some rather admirable makeup to really give Julian a beat down look. In fact, I'll even give him some credit. I don't know if this was intentional or not. It gave him the look, I thought, of kind of wearing having a hollowed out skull on his shoulders. Of being sort of like this husk, this already near corpse, like a man who was already dead and just didn't even know it yet. And if that was intentional, then that is something that I will wholeheartedly hand this movie. But I just don't know if I want to give it that much credit, because the fact is, a movie doesn't have to have a happy ending for it to be enjoyable or to be worth watching. But there was nothing about this that by the end of this left me fulfilled by having seen it, or thankful that I watched it, or like I was given something valuable for sitting through this 90 minutes. Like, absolutely nothing. It's memorable in that I will remember it as a shitty movie that I watched once, and I will always remember why it was shitty and why I hated it. And having a signature style does not mean that your signature style is necessarily always good. It sometimes just means that you make a habit of objectively bad filmmaking. And I didn't find this bold. I didn't find it interesting. I didn't find even the violence in it particularly captivating. Although I will also concede that the club torture scene of, I believe it was Byron, was rather well done. And in fact, he turned in what is, by unfortunate comparison, one of the more energetic performances of the entire movie. But this was 90 minutes of people feeling nothing, reacting to absolutely nothing, having no emotions about anything. They're basically human furniture. They're not actors. They're set pieces with no emotions we can gravitate to, nothing we can relate to, nothing that makes us feel anything about them, except for sometimes pity that these people had to be in this movie. Floor is yours.
If it pleases the court. There are, obviously, especially today, it's funny we're doing this today because CBS All Access / Paramount Plus / Viacom did their entire presentation of all the stuff that they're going to be unleashing on Paramount Plus when CBS All Access changes into that. And somebody commented, was one of the reviewers, I want to say it was from Forbes, was like, they're reproducing so much held IP and relying on it. Isn't that what doomed the theaters in the first place, was an over-reliance on known mass-market IP? And I think, and this is going to kind of go back to the first part of our discussion, I think that there are absolutely filmmakers, work-for-hire filmmakers who will absolutely make whatever IP you ask them to make into whatever it is you want them to make it into, television or movie or whatever. And they'll do the best job they can with it. They're professionals with whatever budget you give them. But that's it. They're doing the thing. They're work for hire. There are the next level of that is doing something that you're kind of passionate about, that you have a take on, but you're making it for a mass market audience. So again, the Marvel movies are probably the best example of this. Are these well made? Yeah, absolutely. They get $200 million budgets. They're given to directors that have a specific vision, a story they want to tell, a thing they want to say about society, but it's all run through the prism of comic books that are being brought to life and an overarching story that is controlled by Kevin Feige. Which some have found, Joss Whedon, we're looking at you, a bit stifling. And so I think then you have the third kind of director, which is joining with the critics that are out there, professional critics that just sort of reject all of it. They know where their bread is buttered. They know how they get paid. You have to review the Tom and Jerry movies and the Flora and Ulysses and the Willy's Wonderland and, the Coming to Americas. You have to review all of that stuff because that's what people are finding and that's what people are tuning into. But you crave for the medium to produce something way off in the extreme. And there are directors like Refn who really do see film. Like there's a Family Guy joke when they did the three directors, and the first one was Tarantino, and Peter looks at the camera and goes, "Cinema is an event," after he's cut off someone's head, I think, and a fountain of blood spurts up. And that's the joke, There are the Tarantinos of the world who, if there's a more self-indulgent director working today than Tarantino, I'd like to meet him. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was fantastic, but it was also way self-indulgent and super pretentious. And so the Tarantinos, the Refns of the world, we mentioned David Lynch before, they are looking at film as an instrument to bring really bizarre things into the culture that I think are necessary. And all that to say, that is where Only God Forgives comes in. Only God Forgives is not meant to be enjoyed by anyone, ever. Okay? Only God Forgives is not a film in the traditional sense of the word. It's an experience. It's a gross, shitty, horrible, terrible experience. But that's what it was meant to be. It is Alice standing at the looking glass going, I'm horrible and so is everything else. I don't know why Refn hates the world. I don't know why Refn's commentaries about the world seem to be life is shitty and pointless. But that seems to be the well from which he's drawing from. And his films and his television show all appear to be a reflection of that. He seems to be saying, and Only God Forgives is part of that. He seems to be saying that there's too much veneer over the heart of humanity, and the heart of humanity is black and cold and wretched and terrible. And I want to bring that ugliness to the screen and make you confront it. Now, that's not going to work for 99% of the people who watch movies. Okay? The people who watch movies, people like, a lot of our friends of the network, the people like my wife, her friends, are not looking for a shitty cinematic experience. They're not looking to be reminded that life is hard and uphill and shitty. They're looking to escape that reality, and this is why we watch the Marvel movies and the Star Wars movies and whatnot. But and there is room definitely in between Refn, which is an extreme, and the Marvel movies, just as an example, in between where you get something like a Watchmen or The Wire, where these things are accessible and entertaining, but also talk about the nature of man and humanity. But if you're if you're the kind of person who's looking to have experiences with film, and it doesn't have to necessarily be with film. It can be with music. It can be with video games. It can be with books. It's art. There are people out there that crave visceral experiences with art. And part of that is feature film, and there's where Only God Forgives and Refn are coming from. Only God Forgives is an ugly story showcasing simple, grotesque violence from a vacant perspective in the Ryan Gosling character. He's just a guy doing a thing, and you're meant to project yourself on him. It's the same thing with Miles Teller in Too Old to Die Young. There's vacancy left for you to project yourself into that character, but why would you? Because they're both kind of wretched human beings. But I think that's what Refn is saying. It's like, aren't you all just a little wretched? Aren't you all just a little shitty somewhere? A little bit? Yeah, you're kind of like that person somewhere in there. There's room for you to see yourself in the Ryan Gosling Only God Forgives character, or Too Old to Die Young, or Drive, or whatever other thing Refn's doing. There's absolutely room for you to project yourself on these vacant blocks of wood posing as characters. That's purposeful. You don't have to like it. It doesn't have to be enthralling to you. But it is there for a purpose, and I think that's defensible. I want to talk about the choice of bleeding out entire scenes with neon pinks and reds. I said this is motif via strip club, and I said that as a joke. But when you think about what strip clubs are, right? They kind of take the veneer off society, and it's just it's dogs humping in a park. But it's dark so that you can't kind of see how horrible it all is and how pointless and shitty the whole experience is. There's loud music so you don't think about it. Everything is set up in a strip club so that you don't think about the situation you're in and how pathetic it actually is. And this is coming from a man who's been to many strip clubs. It's kind of like a casino, where it's just free drinks and, air conditioning and everything to make you forget how much money you're spending until you'll spend more of it. And no clocks. You can't know what time it is, because then you'll leave. Similar thing. So I think Refn, when he's making a comment on the nature of man and humanity and the wretchedness of it all, I think he has to go with these sort of weird, dark, neon lit corridors and scenes of his movies because it just drips in seediness. It has to be seedy to get the point across. So everything just looks gross and makes you feel gross. And as Sean said, Sean was like, I didn't have a fun time watching this. You're not supposed to. It hurt my eyes. It's supposed to hurt your eyes. That's ultimately why, the movie is innocent of all charges. Not guilty, Your Honor, is the only verdict. It is done a certain way for a certain reason, and it does those things to a plumb. And unlike Too Old to Die Young, where half of the cast is speaking in a monotone with 5 minutes in between each said word, to the point where poor Jesse Starcher was starting to have to hit the fast forward button through it all just to get through it. Only Ryan Gosling talks that way in this one. He's actually surrounded by real human beings talking like real people. So this is actually better in the sense of when you want, as he put it, a fairy tale type character to work, and you're purposely directing him to be vacant and to speak slowly and to do line deliveries in a very, very slow cadence and tempo. As I said Tuesday night, that only works if nobody else is doing that too. And nobody else in this movie does that. The mom character, played by Kristen Scott Thomas, she speaks rather normally. And, Sean says she curses excessively. Again, cursing is ugly. It's an ugly language. She's an ugly person, and that's what that's there for. But at least she's speaking in a normal cadence. Lieutenant Chang, speaking in a normal cadence. The only one who seems to be struggling, and Sean's correct about this, is Mai, but she's intimidated, she's frustrated, she's anxious, she's downright frightened at times of Ryan Gosling, and probably a little grossed out by him. Yeah, she's probably not going to be a good conversation haver. She's probably not going to be doing long monologues in this movie. A couple of points of note. If you're looking for grotesque violence, ultra-violence, I mentioned Irreversible as a really great example of what's the most shocking things we can put on cinema, on the screen. This, and this. Great, do it. If you're looking for that kind of thing, this is in that vein, and this achieves that. There are really gross, violent scenes in this. There's scenes of Lieutenant Chang slicing open a dude with his sword, and you actually see bone and blood spurting out. Cinema is an event. There's actually that moment in the movie. Ryan Gosling shoving his hand into his mom's dead womb. It's gross. It's absolutely horrifying. But it's done really well. And so, horror can't be the only genre that looks gross. Why, there are comedies that come across as gross. There's Something About Mary being a really good example of gross comedy. Definitely a kind that I don't like. But I think I think objectively, gross in any number of genres can be useful, and it can be done poorly. Obviously, it can be done cheaply, or it can be done really, really well. And you can't fault the film for doing gross well. It achieved its goal. I'm going to relinquish the floor so that I can talk to Sean, because it's not really part of my defense, but I do want to bring it up. The music in this. What did you think of the music in the film, Sean?
For the most part, it was one of the only things that I still found moderately amusing. I mean, choosing to have an entire, after hours Kumite set to a knockoff of the Stranger Things theme was certainly a choice, but I can't necessarily say anything bad about the score itself. But then again, I also kind of have a good thing, have a thing for a good synth soundtrack.
Well, Cliff Martinez, that seems to be his jam. And if you enjoy the soundtrack and you enjoy the dulcet tones of Cliff Martinez, as brought to you by the soundtrack to Only God Forgives, you can find the soundtrack, Sean, on AmazonMusic.com. I don't know if you know that or not. But yeah.
I did not.
You can stream this entire album on Amazon Music. And as a matter of fact, if you sign up for Amazon Music today, you can get a free 30 days of Amazon Music all to your own. You can listen to it on your phone. You can listen to it on your computer. Anywhere where you would listen to music, it's right there for you. And you can enjoy Amazon Music for free for 30 days by going to getamazonmusic.com/W2M Network. Again, that's getamazonmusic.com/W2M Network. And you can download all the Cliff Martinez you want. I checked. There's all kinds of crap from Refn and Martinez on Amazon Music that you can listen to all day long, Sean. Did you know that?
I did not. And, I love making experimental playlists in my spare time, trying all kinds of different sounds, different ambient soundtracks for while I'm working on this, that, and the other thing throughout the day. And I gotta say, he's a composer I could certainly check out more of, and I could certainly weave in there with stuff like The X, Daft Punk, little new wave, little modern synth punk. Yeah. R.I.P. to the Daft Punkians.
I thought about you when I saw that headline. I'm like, oh, Sean's going to be sad.
Oh, God, yes, I am sad. that saddens me, but then again, I got 28 years of superlative music out of them. Am I really gonna be that bitter that I didn't get more?
So you know how, like, for a week everyone was doing I'm going to tell my kids this was, and it was some ridiculous picture of something else. Somebody put up a good one of the Mandalorian standing next to Boba Fett in their helmets.
I saw that.
It's like, I'm going to tell my kids this is Daft Punk. I actually laughed at that. All right.
I did. That got a chuckle out of me.
So your prosecution of the movie was essentially this was a wretched experience made by a wretched filmmaker, and why did Mark put me through this? And my defense of it was, yup. So yes, now.
This is what would happen if you got Frank Miller really ridiculously high.
Yeah. No. This is Frank Miller on ill hallucinogens for sure. So anything else you want to talk about here before we close up for the night?
Just to kind of sum things up, you mentioned how the saturated neon is essential to doing justice to the really seedy environments in which this movie unfolds. And what I would have to say to that is, you could point to a lot of movies that accomplish the same thing without making your corneas feel like they are constantly under siege.
Okay.
As I remarked at one point while I was messaging you about this, in my mind I keep thinking I could be watching Dredd on Hulu right now. And that's a good example. In fact, that's a great example. The Dredd, The Raid, Blade Runner, Old Boy, all movies. In fact, a lot of Hong Kong action movies are all movies that I could point to where they accomplish the same thing, but they do so without the movie being actually actively sensory torturous to watch. And, at a certain point, even for fans of this movie, look, if you say that a movie isn't supposed to be enjoyable to watch in any way, then you can't really get mad or criticize people who then decide that I'm not going to watch it.
Weirdly, though, this actually made money.
I'm not surprised.
It had a budget of $4.8 million. It made $10.6 at the box office.
Doesn't shock me at all. It's just... God, we said so much about it that I almost feel like there's not that much left really to say. And except that also, one of the most exhausting counter arguments people will try to make something to anything nowadays is just assuming that everybody in the world is just as wretched as they are. It's particularly popular among a lot of extreme conservatives who take some utterly repugnant extreme stances. Is trying to posit that, well, come on, you feel the same way. You would do this. No, because I'm not awful like you.
Here, I want to share something with you real quick. So there's an article here that talks about, from the Hollywood Reporter, and this is, when was this dated? This is June 18th, 2013, and this talks about him winning the Sydney Prize, the Sydney Film Prize, right? And so this is what they said. Okay, so these are people who judge film and give prizes for it, right? Mm-hmm. These people should know film, one would assume. While the Ryan Gosling, Kristen Scott Thomas star has divided critics and audiences since its premiere in competition at the Cannes Film Festival, the Sydney Film Festival jury ultimately awarded a $60,000 prize for audacious, cutting-edge cinema in a majority decision. And this goes on. After 10 days of captivating and diverse film viewing and passionate conversations, the jury arrived at a majority decision. In the true spirit of the competition criteria, we award a visually mesmerizing and disturbing film which polarized our opinions. And so, here's the thing. Someone in one of our beloved family members here at the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, not about this, but about Too Old to Die Young, asked, why are we talking about this now? And I said in chat that, one, because this is when it came up on the schedule and it's something I'd wanted to do for a while, but also, and I've said this a few times now over the course of a week, this is a conversation piece. It really is. Like, I don't know if I've talked about a director or a variety of projects this much. And I'm a guy who does 5 to 6 podcasts a week. But it's like we talk about what's popular, in the moment, and we move on to the next thing. We move on to the next thing. We move on to the next thing. I rarely get to kind of dig in and have the conversation of. I mean, your point is a valid one. If you're trying to make something gross, don't be surprised if I don't watch it. But like I said, there is an audience for give me gross, give me crazy, give me stupid, give me anything that makes me feel something other than the dreck I have to do on a normal basis. Because that's something to talk about.
See, but then the astounding thing is you'll have fans of movies and any kind of media like that. Mm-hmm. Who will then proceed to denounce anyone who doesn't like it.
Well, that's not fair either.
And take their taste to task because they don't like having the metaphorical shit beaten out of them.
No, and I think those people are ridiculous. Look, if you like art house, bizarre, weirdo shit. There's a term I usually use for this, but out of respect, I'm going to refrain from using the South Park bit. But that stuff, you're okay to like that. You're okay to appreciate stuff that's going to turn away 99% of the people who watch it. But then but as you were saying, then you can't get mad when people are like, you're kind of crazy for watching that. Well, it's my own thing. It's kind of like with music. Like if you listen to stuff that's way off the beaten path, like yeah, sure, death metal has like a huge following, but not in comparison to country music, which is loved by people across the earth.
Right.
A country music band will sell out a football stadium. Cannibal Corpse will sell out my living room.
Well, you brought gaming into the conversation. Mm-hmm. And it's funny you mentioned that because there's two games that this really kind of, for some reason, the spirit of this movie kind of evoked in my mind.
Okay.
And one is a game called Spec Ops: The Line. And it's basically a knockoff of Heart of Darkness. is what it really is. So much so that at the end, the game kind of starts in its own way actively berating you for the choices that it forces you to make throughout it. Through the actions that its linearity leaves you no choice but to make. It is a game that punishes you for playing it. It's a criticism that a lot of people made about The Last of Us Part 2 when it came out recently. And that is that, in a major turn from the first game, which is regarded as a masterpiece and completely justifiably so, it's a game wherein it basically takes you to task for the way you choose to play it, and in some cases for choices for scenarios in which you only have one course of action available to you. And again, I mentioned earlier the sentiment of how you tried to point out. Well, come on, you're deep down, you're all just as awful, and you feel the same way. No, I really don't, and that's where I come back to the fact that there's nobody in this movie that I can relate to. It's one thing for a movie to be visceral and tragic, grim, angry, what have you. But I feel like for that to actually be objectively successful, you have to have somebody in there that serves as, if they can't be an insert, somebody who at least has a reaction to it that is definitive, something that's relatable, where you can understand why they react to the circumstances they're in that they do. And that comes down to both how you establish that character, in terms of their backstory, their interaction with others, and the actual reactions themselves. And this movie accomplishes neither. It barely establishes anything about anybody until about a half an hour into it. And even then, nothing it establishes is relatable.
No, I was thinking about his, and again, you don't get this by watching it. You have to do some homework, which I've often said I hate, but
no.
But he says this is like a fairy tale, and I was thinking about like fairy tales in the written form, in their original form, where these are metaphors, these are myths, these are not well developed characters. They are a guy doing a thing that teaches you a lesson. I was thinking about Cinderella, actually, believe it or not, and I was thinking about how, even like if you just focused on the stupid Disney one, how Cinderella, herself is a vacant character that little girls are supposed to project themselves into. That the story is 90% about the mice, and she's just there.
Mm-hmm.
She's just there doing a thing, and you want to be her as a little girl. You want to be saved, and you want to be with or at least we did. Who the hell knows in 2021? You want to be saved. You want to be with the prince. You want to live happily ever after. You want to have romance. You want to and all that. And so I was thinking about like, if he's starting from the basis of Cinderella, if he's starting from the base of a fairy tale, he's like, okay, vacant lead character, sort of shallow character surrounding them, and we go from there. Only instead of romance and the the princess thing, we're talking the ugliness of humanity. And I think that's what he tries to do with these things, which I get is not going to be everyone's thing. I also get that there's going to be people who's like, yeah, man, I'm into it. Like, yeah, show me more gross. Show me more people are awful. And I think it's almost best to keep those characters simple. Like, this isn't the kind of movie where I really want to see things get complicated or complicated people. If all you're going for is fairy tale about garbage.
You know what? I don't mind a character being awful, but give me a reason. Mm-hmm. In most cases, with a few exceptions, most of them related to horror, give me at least a reason why they are awful. You don't have to go to great lengths, but give me something. The one of the few times I can think of when a character just being awful for the sake of being awful has actually worked was Halloween, because it served to make Michael Myers more terrifying. Almost like 99 out of 100 other movies that I see, I need something else. And if this is supposed to be a metaphor, okay, anybody who ever watched this movie and then tried to defend it as saying I was missing a metaphor, I would just lean forward and say, what's the metaphor? Go on. Entertain me. What am I supposed to take away from this? And then just listen to the bullshit, and then proceed to rattle off at least a half a dozen movies that I'm sure whatever cocked up metaphor they could probably pull out of their ass probably did it better.
Right. I do. It's funny you mentioned that, because I kept thinking about like the Family Guy thing where he doesn't like. I feel like this is the last thing we need to say. I think when we've referenced Family Guy 3 times, we're done. But he's talking about The Godfather, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't like it," and the whole family's like, "Whoa, whoa!" Like, how could you not like The Godfather? And he goes, "It insists upon itself." Like, it was such a pretentiously filmy thing to say. And then the response is even more filmy. He was like, "That's because it has a valid point to make." And then he has a line that I still quote, and will usually quote to like Robert Winfrey or somebody who's arguing with me on like "Damn You Hollywood," when somebody is we're having that kind of argument where I just throw my hands up and go, "I like the money pit." Mm-hmm. And so, in this particular case here, I think that's it. I think we can, at the very least, agree, to release it on its own recognizance. Mm. It's like, don't bother the children, and you'll be fine.
It's, you know what? It's the village idiot. Just let it go, because it might be a nuisance, but it's a harmless nuisance. It's not hurting anybody. Just go along on your merry little way, and as long as you stop waving your penis at traffic every Tuesday at noon, there'll be no problems between us.
All right, let's call it there. Tomorrow, we'll be reviewing I Care a Lot from Netflix, and we'll be doing our next chapter in the history of heavyweight boxing, Lennox Lewis. I have said 50 times on this show, we've already reviewed Too Old to Die Young. We did it for 3 hours. It was fantastic. We started off the week, rather innocently enough, with Ed Brubaker's Scene of the Crime. That was myself and Chris Sheehan. Next week, we've got the Rough and Ready show. We're going to be reviewing the Tom and Jerry show that's got a split release between HBO Max and traditional theaters. Jesse will be on to review Epica Omega. David Wright did a podcast with Robert Winfrey looking at the TNG movies, Insurrection, Generations, etc., First Contact. So that's there. And then Saturday the 6th, Friday night, Jesus Christ, Friday during the day, we'll be doing a Damn You Hollywood for Boss Level, and then Jason Teasley and I will do another Damn You Hollywood late in the evening for Coming to America, the Eddie Murphy sequel. And then on Saturday, instead of doing an on trial for it, because I needed to spare Sean this, instead, my son got all jealous that his sister got to do a podcast. So he's like, well, I want to do one too. And I'm like, okay, you're not really ready for long form discussion, but let's do let's do a commentary that's more your bag. So my son Jonas, my daughter Lily, and I will do a alternative commentary for the 1992 Tom and Jerry movie, where they talk. They fly now. All right. We also reviewed the Elimination Chamber. That's up in the archives as well. Sean, do your thing.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to our new sponsors, Grammarly and Amazon Music. Much love to you both. You can follow me on Twitter at Comer Codex for all my rantings, ravings, and please leave me your love, hates, and respectful disagreements. And specifically, please tune in for updates anytime I'm going to be streaming. Now that I am settled into the new day job, I'm going to be getting back to that tomorrow night. That is February 25th. At about 7 p.m. Central Time, I am going to be playing BioShock 2 tomorrow night for about probably first 2-3 hours, and then maybe we'll close up with some ranked Apex Legends. Probably the second verse, same as the first, Friday night. Saturday night, we'll see. We'll see what's going on, but distinctly possible that I may go for the hat trick this week. But yeah, by all means, tune in, help me grow my community, and just come share my love of classic gaming with me.
So as far as Mark and Sean jams, we've got a Long Road to Ruin on April 1st for the Pacific Rim movies, and we're doing that because they've got a Pacific Rim anime coming out on Netflix, so we're doing a whole week of Pacific Rim stuff. And that'll be our contribution. David Wright will join us because he likes robots punching kaiju. Then the following week, we've got the big Godzilla Kong week. We got a whole bunch of stuff dedicated to that. And the on trial will be for King Kong, Peter Jackson's King Kong. Sean's going to defend it. I'm going to prosecute it. And then 2 weeks after that, we've got the 1995 Mortal Kombat movie. So that'll be a fun one to talk about. And that's it for the time being. No more need to be said. That takes us all the way through the end of April. All right, folks, thanks. Court is now... court is now out of session, or however the phrase goes. Be well, be safe, and behave.